Mr. President, this afternoon, Senate Democrats will have the opportunity to vote to reopen the government when the Senate takes up the President's compromise proposal. I hope they're as serious about ending the shutdown as they've claimed to be. Unfortunately, they haven't looked too serious over the past month. Democrat leaders have spent a lot of time talking about ending the partial shutdown, but they've absolutely refused to engage in any genuine negotiations to reopen the government. Democrats don't seem to understand that when there's a disagreement, both sides have to give a little in order to get things resolved. If we're going to get the government reopened, then both Democrats and the President are going to have to compromise. Now, Mr. President, the President understands this. He's repeatedly made it clear that he's willing to negotiate. And on Saturday, he put forward a genuine compromise, legislation that addresses his border security priorities and some of the Democrats' most important immigration priorities. Unfortunately, Democrats' reaction was less than promising. The Speaker of the House labeled the compromise a non-starter before she'd even seen it. But of course, she offered no replacement. Mr. President, President Trump offered a proposal that he believed would address some of the Democrats' concerns. If Democrats didn't like that proposal, then they could have offered an alternative, one that addressed their concerns and attempted to address some of the President's concerns. But so far, the only Democrat proposals have involved the President agreeing to all of the Democrats' demands in exchange for vague promises to address the security and humanitarian crisis at the border at some unspecified date in the future. Mr. President, the Democrat leaders of the House and the Senate may be persisting in their refusal to negotiate, but there are signs that rank-and-file Democrats are starting to get restless. More than one Democrat member of Congress has noted, in the words of one House freshman, and I quote, "Am I willing to talk about more fencing and more drones and more technology and radar and border agents? Absolutely," end quote. Even the House Majority Leader sounded like he was ready to break with Speaker Pelosi's obstruction, stating that Democrats are, and I quote, "for border security," and that, quote, "physical barriers are part of the solution," end quote. That from the House Majority Leader. Well, Mr. President, I hope that that spirit of compromise continues to grow. In a couple of hours, Senate Democrats will have the chance to vote on the President's proposal. The bill before us would immediately reopen the government. It would provide paychecks and back pay to federal workers. It would provide needed disaster recovery funding. It would deliver all 7 of the remaining 2019 appropriations bills, the product of bipartisan work in the House and in the Senate. And it would tackle the security and humanitarian crisis at our border and address Democrat immigration priorities. In fact, Mr. President, this bill contains a version of immigration legislation originally sponsored by the Democrat leader, the Democrat whip, and the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, among others. The bill before us today is a genuine compromise. And I hope at least some of my Democrat colleagues will see their way to supporting it. Because, Mr. President, it is the only legislation that we will be voting on today that can be signed into law, end the shutdown, reopen the government, make sure that federal workers are getting paid, and address our crisis at the border. Democrats' refusal to engage in serious negotiations has already cost federal workers a paycheck and limited government services for literally tens of thousands of Americans. It's time for Democrats to stop putting their antipathy for the President above the needs of the American people. I hope we do that this afternoon, Mr. President. The time has come to make a deal, and we need Democrats at the table. Mr. President, I yield the floor.